Final Fantasy VII, the title that revolutionized the market and changed video games forever. The importance of this game and its influence in the Western market is a well-researched topic, and it's been taken on by people far more qualified than I am. But of course, with each Japanese masterpiece comes its English localization, which is the main focus of this channel. Hello everyone and welcome. This is Localization Addict. I'm Hagane, and today we're going to look through the story of failure and success behind Final Fantasy VII's English localization by taking into account not only the text itself but also the context in which it was crafted. So without further ado, let's get started. Final Fantasy VII was a godsend in the Western market. It was the first massively successful Japanese role-playing game. So much so that there were people already hyped about the game prior to release. This means that the people in charge of translating the game were under a lot of pressure to perform well. While there is no clear answer as to who exactly they were, multiple sources such as Eurogamer and GameFAQs claim that this was done by one or two people. Imagine the responsibility. The destiny of the entire 45-hour-plus game for an English audience was in the hands of one or two people at most. So, back to today's topic. Where exactly did this localization go wrong? And what did it do right? Let's start with where it went wrong. We all know some of the most infamous fails were produced in this localization. No way. Of course. And this guy are sick. All iconic mistakes that remain in our collective memories to this day. They weren't small, and it shows that the people working on this were working so much that they slipped up more than a few times. Let's talk a little bit about these mistakes. Firstly, the punctuation in this game is all over the place. There are spaces everywhere. Exclamation marks and parentheses being preceded by a space are somewhat common. Odd spaces get added after quotation marks as well. Suspension points also exist in the strangest locations, not to mention the occasional dash of questionable grammar choices shoved in every now and then. Sometimes the translations can be a bit literal too, like when Don Corneo is being threatened by the gang and he reveals that Heidegger from Shinra was the one who ordered him to get buried. In Japanese, he says, Shinra no Heidegger da, which literally means Heidegger of Shinra. While this construction works perfectly well in Japanese, English uses the word from instead to indicate where someone comes from. I also don't understand why some things were translated the way they were. Like for example, in the same scene with Don Corneo, after being threatened by Tifa, he says, "You're serious, aren't you? Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy." Whereas in Japanese, he says, "Hohi, nee-chan, honki da na, erai erai," which would mean something like, "Wow, girl, you're serious, aren't you? Well done, well done." I admit that this might not be a mistranslation so much as a failure on my part to understand the reasoning behind this translation, but I still wanted to use this as a notable example of how the translations somewhat misconstrues the meaning of the original. Another such phrase comes in the same scene with Corneo when he's discussing Shinra's plan to let the plate destroy the Sector 7 slums. Shinra's trying to crush a small rebel group called Avalanche and want to infiltrate their hideout. In Japanese, he says, "Shinra wa avalanche to ka iu chikkoi urasoshiki o tsubusu tsumari da. Aji to moro tomo na." Which means Shinra is planning on crushing a small terrorist/rebel group, hideout and all. As a side note, urasoshiki is an umbrella term for any organization that goes against the status quo of society, be it mafia, terrorist organizations, etc. As you can see, there is no mention of infiltrating their hideout, which makes sense considering they want to let the plate fall over it. These are just some examples of places where the original and the translation are significantly different in a not so good way. To be clear, I am not pushing for a literal translation, but please keep in mind that the original and the localization depict two very different scenarios. Now, I know I mentioned a bunch of reasons why I strongly believe that the localization could be improved on. But now I'll expand on a huge aspect that is often neglected by most people when they talk about this subject. For that purpose, we need to remind ourselves what the purpose of localizing a game is in the first place. What is the meaning behind translating a game? Why do companies pay translators? Well, the purpose behind localization is, simply put, to make a certain piece of work available to people who speak a language other than the original. In this way, Final Fantasy VII's English localizations succeeded. Of course, I'm not going to argue that Final Fantasy VII shouldn't have had an excellent translation. Yet these mistakes are forgivable, taking into account that the rest of the game was still enjoyable and memorable. If you played the game in English and you haven't played the original Japanese, then its localization is in fact the game you grew to love. Considering how many people still love Final Fantasy VII to this day in the English-speaking world, without the need to learn Japanese to appreciate it, this version fulfilled its purpose more than well enough. That's why I consider that, while not perfect, the English localization of Final Fantasy VII was a successful one that managed to earn the hearts of millions of people, especially taking into account the fact that it was written by, at most, 2 people. This will be all for today. Thank you all for watching. If you like this video and would like me to make more videos like this, hit that like button and subscribe. I also have a Twitter account and TikTok, so go follow me there too. See you next time!